This video was posted on the Daily Mail's Instagram page. On the left, you see street fires burning through the night, shattered glasses underfoot, and people running, police forming lines. The caption reads, "Response to George Floyd." On the right, a quiet group stands arm in arm, heads bowed in prayer, and that caption reads, "Response to Charlie Kirk." This clip keeps resurfacing on social media. This is part of the reason why I am making this video. First, I am going to define some keywords to help you understand what people mean when they talk about racism, bigotry, systematic racism, systemic racism, white supremacy, black supremacy, all of these words that we keep hearing every day. After that, I'm going to talk about two cases people are arguing about now in the current space. We'll talk about George Floyd and Charlie Kirk. I'll walk you through what happened, who did what, how the law looks at it, and where things are now. Then I'm pulling up the real data on crime, policing, protests, and what happens online. I'll show you what the numbers actually say and also what they can tell us. I am not just going to cherry pick headlines like some people do or choose statistics that fit a particular narrative. What I'm going to talk about is, identity, and that is basically how people see themselves and how that actually plays out in day-to-day life. And then I'll talk about what prompted me to make this video in the first place. Amro Fadil, or Myron Gaines. And he's known on social media, one of those popular influencers who's a part of the manosphere. He made some, let's say, peculiar claims on Piers Morgan Uncensored. And after listening to what he had to say, I felt moved to address his claims and basically fact check some of the things he said about black people specifically. I found them vexing, for want of a better word, but I didn't want to react out of emotion, so I did some research, and here we are. I'm not here to entertain you. This is a serious discussion, and these are my personal views about what I see as racist remarks made by Myron Gaines on the Piers Morgan show. So, we will be having a sobering discussion about some topics that can be inflammatory, especially when emotions are involved. But I'll try my best to be as impartial as I can while laying out the facts. Of course, you might disagree with me, as is your right. You might disagree on some of these issues, but that is to be expected, and I also welcome your disagreement. You can talk about it in the comments, and I will try my best to respond to you when I can. So we will start with some clear definitions so that we can all be on the same page, because more often than not, people end up creating straw men and having parallel discussions about what appears to be the same topic when in fact they are not. So supremacy is an interesting topic, and I will explain what that means. Is white supremacy the same as black supremacy? We look at how white supremacy actually operates in law and policy, and where fringe ideologies sit today, and how those differ from white supremacy. Then I think I'll be looking at unconscious bias, and I think this should give us a very good idea of how someone could do something racist and not actually be aware of it, right? I should also point out that intent does not matter when it comes to a racist act. It's the outcome and the impact on the victim. We'll also take a look at Black Lives Matter and determine if the White Lives Matter was a valid response, to that movement. Then we'll examine the George Floyd killing and the Charlie Kirk assassination side by side to determine if these two unfortunate events in our history are the same and thus have the same results. Of course, this is coming against the background of the video that was posted by the Daily Mail and others suggesting that black people reacted violently to a quote-unquote criminal being killed by the police versus a political activist being assassinated. Then we will close with a point-by-point review of Myron Gaines' claims. He made about 15 claims on the Piers Morgan show. But first, we will start off with the definitions, because, as I said, it is important to define what we are talking about before we can have a genuine conversation. I will try to show these definitions on the screen as I am speaking. So if you see me disappear, that's just me putting the definitions on the screen so that you can read them. We will begin with racism. Now, Racism is the belief that some races are naturally better or worse than others, and due to that belief, one treats people unfairly or with hostility because of their race or ethnicity. Racism is when race changes how someone is valued or treated. You don't have to hate anyone or use a racial slur like calling a black person the N-word for it to count as racism. If a person's race affects your decision, your attitude, the way you speak to them, the type or severity of punishment for wrongdoing, then that is racism. It doesn't matter if it was intentional or not. Intent shows what kind of person you are, but the outcome shows what actually happened. So, what are some examples of racism? A security guard in a store only follows black people around, but not white people. A person with a black sounding name and a person with a name typically seen as white both apply for the same job. They have similar credentials, but only the person with the white sounding name gets called for an interview. A teacher laughs off a white kid's disruption as energy, but writes up a black kid for the exact same thing. So, how do you know if something is racist? All right, we're going to have to do a test. If you keep everything the same and you just switch the person's race, would you treat them the same way? You don't have to hate someone or believe you're better than them for your actions to still be racist. And that's a big reason why people, especially white people, get upset when they hear the word racism, because there's almost never any separation between what happened and what kind of person they are. The next word is racist. Now, this one can be a bit tricky because it gets used as a noun or an adjective, and sometimes both at once. That's why people get defensive when they're called a racist. So, what is racist? When it is used as an adjective, so describing something abstract, it means actions, attitudes, or systems that reflect or promote racial prejudice, discrimination, or the belief in a racial hierarchy. For example, saying African Americans are naturally criminals is a racist belief. So, who is a racist? A racist is someone who shows hostility or prejudice toward others because of their race or ethnicity, or who believes some races are inherently superior or inferior to others. For example, if a person refuses to hire someone just because of their skin color, that's a racist act. One important thing to know, though, racism isn't defined by the race of the person doing it. It's defined by the act itself. So if someone refuses to hire a black person just because they're black, that's racism, even if the person making that call is also black. The key is motive. If race is the reason for unfair treatment, it's racism. That is sometimes called internalized racism, which is when someone buys into negative beliefs or biases about their own group, usually from broader messages in society. But the core definition doesn't change. Treating someone unfairly because of race is racism, no matter who does it. Also, just because someone does something racist doesn't mean that the person is a racist or always has been. It's better to say that what they did was racist instead of just slapping the label racist on them, unless they openly admit it or the act is so over the top that there's no question, like when Dylan Roof murdered 9 black parishioners during Bible study at Emmanuel American Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015. Now let's talk about bigotry and bigots. Bigotry is a strong and unreasonable dislike or hatred towards people who are different, especially because of their race, religion, or beliefs. It's stubborn and closed-minded. Bigotry is like a broad umbrella term that covers a lot of things, including racist and racism. For example, a bigot will say, they're all like this, and refuse to hear or see anything else. You can be a bigot about religion, nationality, sexuality, gender, language, or politics. However, all racists are bigots, but not all bigots are racist. Racism is just one kind of bigotry. Here are some examples. Group generalizations that ignore individuals, hostility towards facts or counter-examples, double standards like forgiving my group while punishing their group for the exact same thing, social distance rule, don't hire them, don't marry them, don't live near them. So if someone calls Dr. Umar Johnson a bigot, they're right. Just saying. Why does this matter? If you mix up racism and bigotry, you can't solve the problem. Some problems are about race, others are about something else. You have to define the problem before you can fix it. Let's look at systemic racism. Systemic racism is racism that is built into laws, institutions, and everyday systems. It is how the rules and structures consistently favor one group over others, even if it was not intentional. Systemic refers to the machine or the system itself, the way institutions are built and run, laws, reforms, budget schedules, zoning, discipline codes, patrol maps, hiring funnels. If the machine keeps producing racial gaps, you have systemic racism. No one has to use a racial slur for the harm to be real. Example, let's look at the lending rule. A bank uses old maps to judge neighborhoods that are risky. Those maps were shaped by segregation decades ago. Nobody says anything racist out loud, but black families still get denied loans more often. So it's the rule that does the damage and not the person denying the loan. Let's look at school discipline. A school has a zero tolerance policy. Kids get written up for things like defiance, which is vague and easy to misread. Black students get suspended more often for the same behavior. So on the surface, the policy sounds fair and reasonable, but when you look at the results, one group is disproportionately affected by it. Another example is hiring funnels. A manager hires mostly through referrals, which you might not see as a problem, but let's say the team is mostly white people. What will happen is that new hires end up being mostly white. This didn't happen because the manager is racist. It was a result of a process that keeps filtering out qualified people who don't have the same skin color as the team. Another one is access by address. A city builds a new highway and the route runs straight through a mostly black neighborhood. Because of that, people now have to drive further to reach basic things like health clinics, schools, and work. And the extra distance means longer commutes, more money spent on gas, and less time at home. Over the years, these changes add up. People's health gets worse because clinics and hospitals are harder to reach. Kids struggle because it's harder to get to school. Parents lose job opportunities because getting to work takes longer. In the end, the whole community falls behind. Lower incomes, worse health, less stability. Nobody set out to hurt this neighborhood, but the result is still the same. The decision made life harder for a mostly black community. That's how a policy or planning decision can cause harm, even without anyone intending to do it. As you can see, systemic doesn't mean every person in this system is biased. It means the system itself, the way it was built, keeps creating a racial gap. So when people keep saying racism doesn't exist in America, they are missing the point. And honestly, that's a pretty bigoted view of what's really happening to the people that are affected. Just because you haven't experienced racism doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Just because you're doing well in America doesn't mean the system isn't creating racial gaps. A lot of people have a jaundiced view of these issues, including a lot of affluent black people, when it comes to the real systemic problems African America face in that country. Let's look at systemic versus systematic. Systematic racism refers to deliberate organized actions or policies that target people based on race. It's racism carried out in a planned, consistent way through rules, procedures, or decisions that are intentionally designed to disadvantage a racial group. Unlike systemic racism, which is built into the structure of institutions and may not be intentional, systematic racism is intentional and methodical. I'll give you two examples of systematic racism in America. First is the Jim Crow laws, and second is redlining. Why are these two considered systematic and not systemic racism? Well, let's start with Jim Crow. Jim Crow laws were state and local laws in the U.S. South that were deliberately written to separate black and white Americans in every part of life from the late 1800s through the mid-1900s. Schools, buses, restaurants, voting booths, even water fountains. The rules were detailed, enforced by police and courts, and backed by state governments. That's what makes it systematic. It was racism carried out through official policies, step by step, across generations. So this wasn't an unintentional outcome of Jim Crow laws. It was deliberate and targeted people based on race. Now, redlining was a housing policy used by banks and federal agencies starting in the 1930s. Neighborhoods, mostly black residents, were marked in red on maps and labeled high risk. These color-coded maps were drawn on purpose to deny black families access to mortgages, insurance, and investment, and the policies were consistently enforced. That's systematic racism. Planned, documented, and carried out on purpose. So when someone says racism doesn't exist in America, maybe they mean systematic racism, like, no one is deliberately, preventing black people from accessing stuff, but that's not the only kind of racism. Remember, intent does not matter, it's the outcomes that do. And, people throw around the term systematic racism a lot, but most of the time when they say systematic, they actually mean systemic. We're going to look at white supremacy. White supremacy is the belief or a system that treats white people as superior to others. It can be obvious, like hate groups, or subtle, like policies and cultural norms that give white people more power or value. A clear example of white supremacy in action is the ideology behind the Ku Klux Klan, or KKK, which was founded in 1865 by Confederate veterans. The KKK used terror, lynching, and intimidation to suppress black Americans and keep white dominance in place, especially during Reconstruction and the Jim Crow era. The group openly pushed the idea that white Christians were supposed to run American society. They targeted not just black communities, but also Jews, immigrants, and Catholics. The KKK was one of the oldest and most infamous white supremacist groups in the United States. Its legacy is decades of racial violence, political influence, pushback against civil rights reforms. Even though the KKK numbers have dropped, their symbols and talking points still show up in today's hate movements. Black supremacy is the belief that black people are superior to other racial groups. It is much less common in institutional settings, but it can still show up in rhetoric or ideology. For example, the Nation of Islam, particularly under the leadership of Elijah Muhammad before 1975, was described by the Southern Poverty Law Center as promoting the theology of innate black superiority over whites. This belief system was framed as a direct response to white supremacy and historical oppression, but it included claims that white people were inherently inferior and morally bankrupt. Let us look at unconscious bias. No, unconscious bias are hidden preferences or judgments we make without realizing it. These biases affect how we treat people based on race, gender, or other traits, even when we think we are being fair, right? So, for example, a hired manager reviews 2 resumes. One is from Emily, and the other is from Lakeisha. Both have the same qualifications, and without realizing it, the manager leans towards Emily, assuming she'll fit better with the team. No, this decision was based on just a gut feeling shaped by years of cultural messaging about names, race, and professionalism. To the manager, it was just a neutral choice, but to Lakeisha and to anyone paying attention, it looks like racial discrimination. The outcome is that a qualified black candidate gets passed over because of race-based assumptions. So, if you're a white person and someone calls you racist, having a black spouse or a black friend doesn't really matter in this context. Unconscious bias is often invisible to the person doing it, but it has the same effect as racism for the person on the receiving end. So you might want to self-reflect and check if you have any unconscious bias, and that goes for any race, because anyone can be racist. So that basically covers all the important terms we'll use in this video. You can always come back to this section of the video if you want to refresh your memory on these definitions as we move through the next parts of the video that I'll be looking at. So the next thing that I'll be looking at in depth is white supremacy versus black supremacy. I look at how white supremacy has operated in law and policy, where fringe ideologies sit now, and why scale and power matter.